My business partner stole $1 million from me. And the worst part isn't even the number. It's that I still don't know exactly when he decided to do it. 3 years ago, nobody could have convinced me this was where we'd end up. Because in the beginning, this wasn't a story about betrayal. It was a story about the best partnership I'd ever had.
Hi, I'm Jordan. Before any of this happened, my life looked pretty simple, honestly. I had a good job at a well-known company, solid salary, stable role, the kind of position most people would tell you not to complain about. And I didn't complain. Life was comfortable, predictable, in a good way. But somewhere along the way, a quiet thought started showing up more and more. That itch to build something of my own, instead of building someone else's vision for another paycheck. I sat with that feeling for almost a full year before I told a single person about it. I wasn't ready to say it out loud, not even to myself, really. Eventually, I mentioned it to a few close friends, almost casually, half expecting them to talk me out of it. One of them was Marcus. Marcus had a similar life to mine at the time. A good job at a reputable company, a comfortable salary, no obvious reason to shake things up. But when I explained what I was thinking, he didn't just nod politely. He leaned in. He agreed with almost everything I said, and within days, he was the one pushing the idea forward more than I was. He started drafting a rough business plan on his own time, staying up late after work just to sketch out numbers and structure. Every evening after our regular jobs ended, we'd meet at the same small coffee shop to go over what he'd put together and talk through the next steps. More often than not, I'd arrive to find him already there, sitting at our usual table, papers spread out, ready before I was. That consistency did something to me. It's a small thing to notice in hindsight, someone simply showing up early, again and again. But it was one of the first things that made me trust him completely. We eventually decided to build it together, for real. We each put in exactly the same amount of money, signed the exact same paperwork, took on the exact same risk, dollar for dollar, from day one.
6 months in, we landed our first major client. A deal big enough that we celebrated with cheap champagne in our tiny rented office, standing between 2 desks because there wasn't room for a table yet. What I remember most from that night isn't the champagne. It's finding out, almost by accident, that Marcus had rewritten our entire proposal 3 separate times that week, alone, after midnight, without mentioning it to me once. I only found out because I noticed the file timestamps by chance while looking for something else. When I asked him about it, he just shrugged. Didn't want to stress you out with drafts. Wanted to show you something that actually worked. That became the pattern from there. Every milestone after that first client, hiring our first employee, moving into a slightly bigger office, hitting our first $100,000 in a single month, carried the same quiet signature underneath it. Marcus, working long after I'd gone home, solving a problem before I'd even noticed it existed, then downplaying his own part in it the next morning. His respect for me only seemed to grow alongside the business itself. In front of new hires, in front of clients, he made a point of crediting my instincts out loud, even when I would have happily let it go unsaid. If it's about growth or the client relationship, that's his call, not mine, he told our first employee, gesturing at me the week she started. I want you to really sit with all of this, because it matters enormously for what comes later. This wasn't a story about a con artist who fooled a naive business owner from day one. This is a story about a genuinely kind, thoughtful, deeply present person who also, at some point along the way, decided to take everything I had built. Both of those things were true about Marcus at the exact same time, for years.
that contradiction is the part that still keeps me up some nights, more than the money ever has.
That devotion turned into a rhythm most business partners spend their whole career searching for and never find. If I looked exhausted after weeks of back-to-back client pitches, Marcus noticed before I even said a word. "You look wiped. Go home, get some rest. I've got the numbers covered this week. Don't even think about it." If he was buried under a filing deadline, I'd quietly take a few of his calls off his plate without waiting to be asked. We built an entire unspoken language around taking care of one another. A tired look meant someone else stepped in without discussion. A rough week meant the other person absorbed the weight of it. No explanation needed. At the time, I genuinely thought we'd found something most partnerships never figure out. I used to tell people we'd built a version of trust that most partners only talk about wanting. Looking back now, with everything I know, I see something else woven into that same rhythm. Every time I stepped back to rest, I was also stepping back from visibility. Every time he said, "I've got this, you don't need to worry about it," I was quietly handing over one more piece of oversight I'd never get back without asking for it directly. None of that felt like losing control in the moment. It felt like being cared for by someone who genuinely loved doing it. I had no idea yet that being cared for and losing oversight were slowly becoming the same motion. The first strange number showed up sometime in year 2. It was an invoice that didn't quite match what I remembered approving. Not a huge amount, a few $1,000s. Small enough to get lost in a company moving as fast as ours was. But I noticed it, and for once, I actually asked. Marcus laughed it off almost instantly. "Oh, that? Accounting software glitch. I already caught it and fixed it last week, just forgot to mention it." He pulled up a screen right there, showed me a corrected entry with a clean explanation attached, and the small knot in my stomach untied itself completely. I remember actually feeling embarrassed for bringing it up at all. Here was a partner who clearly had everything handled down to the smallest detail, and I'd made him stop mid-conversation to explain something already resolved before I'd even noticed it. For a while after that, everything genuinely looked fine. Better than fine. Revenue kept climbing. A major client renewed early, ahead of schedule. We celebrated over dinner, and I told him, half joking, that I was glad I'd said something, just to see how quickly he'd already gotten ahead of it. I thought that was the end of it. A blip, resolved, forgotten. I had no idea that 2 weeks later, I'd find something that wouldn't untie itself nearly so easily. If this kind of trust, the kind that makes you feel embarrassed for even questioning someone you love, sounds familiar, tell me in the comments. I read every single one. Small things started happening after that. Not the kind of things you build a case around at the time. The kind of things you explain away quietly, one at a time. A client emailed a question meant for me directly. By the time I saw it, Marcus had already replied and closed the loop. "Didn't want to bother you with something small," he said, shrugging it off. I started noticing he kept his phone face down on the table during our meetings. Screen always dark, always angled away from me. When I mentioned it once, half joking, he just said, "I've always been pretty private about my phone. You know that about me." And he was right. He always had been. That was the strange part. Nothing about his behavior actually felt new. It felt like the same person I'd always known, just slightly more present in places I used to stand myself. "I've got it handled. You don't need to worry about that side of things. You focus on the big picture. Let me deal with the details." Every one of those sentences sounded exactly like support, because for years, that's exactly what they had been. It took me a long time, longer than I'm proud of, to notice they were also quietly rerouting every piece of financial oversight away from me. I didn't feel suspicious yet. If anything, I felt lucky. I had a partner willingly absorbing all the parts of the business I never enjoyed dealing with myself. I wouldn't understand what that arrangement actually meant until the numbers stopped being explainable with a shrug and a shared screen. Looking back, I can point to a dozen small moments just like these, spread out over almost a year. None of them, on their own, would have made me pick up the phone and call a lawyer. That's exactly why they worked. A pattern built slowly enough never announces itself as a pattern. It just feels like the ordinary texture of a relationship you already trust completely. It was a Thursday night, and I was going through our books personally for an upcoming investor update. Something I rarely did anymore, since Marcus usually prepared those for us both. One transfer caught my eye almost immediately. A payment to a vendor name I didn't recognize, for an amount that didn't line up with anything on our active project list. I told myself it was probably a new supplier Marcus had onboarded without mentioning it. We brought on new vendors constantly. It genuinely wasn't unusual on the surface. I almost closed the laptop right there. My hand was actually on the lid. Instead, for the first time in over a year, I opened the full transaction history instead of just glancing at the summary report like I normally did. That's when I saw the second one, then a third, each one smaller, spread carefully across different months, so no single transfer looked alarming sitting on its own. I sat there for a long time, just staring at the screen, repeating the same sentence I'd been telling myself for 2 straight years. He wouldn't. Not Marcus. Not after everything. But for the first time since I'd known him, that sentence didn't fully land the way it always used to.
I didn't sleep much that night. By morning, what had started as 3 unexplained transfers had turned into 11. Once I finally went back through 18 full months of records instead of the 2 I'd originally checked. None of them taken individually looked like theft. That was the design of it, I understand now, painfully clearly. Together, spread out patiently over time, they added up to a number I couldn't say out loud yet, even alone in my own kitchen. I called Marcus. He didn't pick up. I told myself he was probably in a meeting. I texted him a screenshot of one transfer, asking directly what it was for. 20 minutes passed with no reply. Then an hour. When he finally responded, it was 3 words. Let's talk tonight. Not, that's a mistake, let me look. Not, give me a second, I'll check. Just, let's talk tonight. Something about those 3 words sat completely differently than anything he'd ever said to me before in 3 years of partnership. For that entire time, every uncertainty between us had always been resolved within minutes, with a clear explanation, a laugh, a screen turned toward me. This time there was only silence, followed by a vague promise to talk later, once he was ready. I spent the rest of that day going through every account we had shared access to. By the afternoon, I wasn't looking for one honest mistake anymore. I was looking for how much of the company I built was actually still mine.
By the time Marcus finally called that night, I already had the full picture in front of me. Over 19 months, transfers had moved steadily out of our joint accounts into entities I'd never once heard of. Small enough individually to pass without a second glance,
large enough together to total just over $1 million. He didn't deny it on the phone. That surprised me, almost as much as the total itself did. He said something about protecting our runway and handling things you didn't need to worry about. The exact same language he'd used for 3 years to describe every kindness he'd ever shown me. I remember putting the phone down afterward and just sitting there in the dark office, not saying a word, not crying, not reacting at all in any way I could name. Just breathing, slowly, in a room that suddenly felt like it belonged to someone I no longer knew.
Later that week, going through older records far more carefully than I ever had before, I found something that changed how I understood the entire timeline. The very first of those transfers wasn't from year 2, when I'd noticed that first invoice. It was from 4 months into the partnership, barely past the point where he'd first told me gently, "You don't need to worry about the accounts. I've got it." That sentence, the one that had made me feel more cared for than almost anything else he'd ever said to me, was the exact moment the money had actually started moving. If you've made it this far into this story, hit subscribe now, because this isn't the last story like this one I'm gonna tell you.
I still have one photo left from our very first real office. Just a small rented room with 2 desks pushed together and one whiteboard leaning against the wall. We're both in it, laughing at something I honestly don't even remember anymore. I can't look at that photo the same way now, because I know that somewhere inside that laugh, half of it was completely real, and half of it was already something else entirely. And I still don't know, even now, exactly where that line was. Here's what I understand, looking back with real distance from all of it. Marcus wasn't performing kindness the entire time we knew each other. That's actually the harder truth to sit with, harder than the money itself. Most of it was genuinely real. But real warmth and calculated control aren't opposites the way we assume they are. They can live inside the same person at the same time for years. That's exactly what makes this particular kind of manipulation so difficult to see clearly from the inside while you're living through it. The phrases that felt like love, "I've got this, you don't need to worry, just focus on the big picture," were also quietly removing every checkpoint that could have caught this so much earlier. That doesn't mean it was always deliberate from day one, but deliberate or not, it was always effective.
If there's one thing I want you to genuinely take from everything I've just told you, it's this. Oversight is never the opposite of trust. A partner who truly has your best interest at heart will never resist you staying informed, staying involved, staying able to check the numbers yourself whenever you want to, without it becoming a conversation. I don't want anyone else watching this to end up sitting in a bank one morning, hands shaking, asking themselves the exact same question I asked. How did I not see this coming? If this story hit close to home for you, if you've ever trusted someone so completely that questioning them felt like the real betrayal, tell me below. I want to hear it. Not to relive it publicly, but because I know how isolating it feels when something like this happens and you assume you're the only one who missed it. And subscribe, because next week, I'm telling you another story you need to hear before it happens to you too.